But that's the kind of things that's starting to go on. As you mentioned, there's a revolution may be coming again, another revolution, a cultural revolution. There's a lot going on today. You can see it in our political world. But anyway, my father, who worked on the railroad, was out in the railroad yard, and he said that God talked to him and told him that I would live, which is pretty amazing. Anyway, when I was young, I was very severely dyslexic, and I didn't do well in school. I went to college and flunked out, and went to Vietnam, volunteered for Vietnam. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But after I returned from Vietnam, I went back to the same college I flunked out of, and it was a Jesuit school. They did not permit you to take the same course again, and if you did better in the course, you could eliminate the first grade. You had to keep the first grade no matter what. I aced many of the courses that I actually failed. I got an undergraduate degree in accounting and a master's degree in business. I had a career and now retired from, I was the director of the National Business Center for the Bureau of Land Management. I was on the adjunct faculty of Colorado University, Regis College, and University of Phoenix. I was elected to public office as in the Metropolitan District for Ken Carroll, and I also served on the Master Association Board of Directors for Ken Carroll, and finished that work about 3 or 4 years ago. Moved to Castle Rock about 4 years ago. So that's a little bit of my background.
Yeah. So you were dyslexic, and then you became an accountant?
Well, the reason was, when you're dyslexic, as an aside, when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, it's a learning disability they didn't recognize at that time. They just thought you were stupid. You just were slow learners. You couldn't learn. They wanted to put me in with the special ed kids. These are kids who really couldn't do anything. You know, they had all kinds of disabilities. So what was the point again?
The dyslexic accountant.
Oh, the reason I went into accounting was I can comprehend really well, but I have to read really slow. And accounting textbooks are so detailed that when you read, you only have 3 or 4 pages of homework. Because it's so detailed, I could do that, and I didn't have a problem. Like, I could never take English literature. You have to read all that stuff.
Yeah. Wow. So obviously you were in the Marines. You were an infantryman. So infantry is a foot soldier. You know, they're the ones carrying the rifles. Locate, close with, and destroy the enemy. So might tell the folks, what was your training? What prepared you to go over to Vietnam?
Well, what maybe people don't fully appreciate is that it's a part of the national security of the United States. You have to have ground troops and people with boots on the ground that's up close and personal in the way they conduct their warfare, and that's necessary. There were Marines kicking in the doors in Fallujah. The United States Marine Corps took Mosul in about 1/10 of the time. That's going on right this very day. So the Marine Corps prepares you to be, they prepare you to die in combat. That's what they do. I mean, we notice everybody when they show you a Marine picture in the paper, they've got the blues on. Well, they don't give you blues. You have to just sit down in a chair when you're at boot camp, and they take a coat and put it around you. It's got buckles in the back. And then you put a hat on you. You got your picture, so when you're dead, you can have it in the newspaper.
Yeah.
They don't give you that uniform. You're not good enough to get that.
If you want it, you have to buy it, right?
Yeah, they did that in '67. They did that in '86.
Still doing it.
It's just a fake that you're wearing.
Yeah.
You can buy them, but they're expensive, right?
Yes, I never could at the time afford it. I mean, when I went into the Marine Corps in 1967, I was paid $99 a month. If you died in combat, you would receive $10,000. That was what the government would pay. Anyway, I went through Parris Island, went on to advanced infantry training in Camp Lejeune, and went then to what they called Westpac. They sent me to Camp Pendleton for some additional training, put you on an airplane, flew you to Okinawa, then flew you into Da Nang. After 3 months after I was in the Marine Corps, I was in Vietnam. So it happens very quickly.
How did you get, were you drafted or did you volunteer?
I volunteered.
Uh-huh.
So we saw on the map where Khe Sanh was. If you go, to your right, to the east, that's basically where Da Nang is. So you get to Da Nang, it's December, right? So what's the weather like in Vietnam in December?
Well, it's always hot, pretty hot. But surprisingly, when you go into the highlands, which the pictures, I don't know if they depict how tall this is. These are mountains like, and when you get to January and February, the monsoon rains come. You can't see very far, and that's why they take advantage of it. That's why they hit that base at that time. But it's high up, and it actually gets pretty cool. It's not real hot, but you're carrying. By the way, I always carried 5 hand grenades, 15 bandoliers of ammo, those cartridges that fit
Right.
in it. And you have a 11-pound helmet. I would often carry a 25-pound radio. I think I had probably 50 or 60 pounds that you would, when you go out humping, that you have to carry with you. But we suspended all patrolling from the Khe Sanh base because we were surrounded. There was so many NVA around that any patrols you get slaughtered. We took one patrol out on February, around February, I got the date, to take a 50 caliber machine gun that was at the end of the Khe Sanh Air Base. We were supposed to go out and take it out. And we were ambushed and never took it out. I have something I wrote to the parents of a guy named Gaines who died that day, and I'd like to read that. No. When I was on the board at Ken Carroll for the Metro District, I surfaced the idea of the Metro District having a monument, a veterans monument. And there were no other veterans on the board, but they seemed inclined to want to do it. But then they really delayed it. I tried to convince them that I thought the community would really like to have a monument to veterans. They finally agreed, it finally got built. But in trying to convince him, I wrote this. I was trying to cajole them into the vote for the monument, and at the end of this I said, lastly, on a personal note, I did not look to create this problem, the problem of getting approval. I knew the article that I wrote about it would prompt intense disagreement, and that's no fun way to conduct one's life. Why did I take such an unusual measure? I am guided, like most combat veterans, by very different priorities. You see, I have no business being alive. My war experience is so far outside the normal range of living that it is completely unimaginable to those in civilian life. That is why most combat veterans didn't speak of their war experiences, because that experience simply cannot be communicated. The war dead I mentioned in the article were my brothers. I am guided by the shed blood of my brothers who died under the flag of my country. I will give you just a glimpse of war to demonstrate the emotional connection it can foster in our veteran community, and why veterans and people connected to veterans are so downright passionate. I stood in the living room of a tiny 2-bedroom frame house in Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania, with the family of Bernard Gaines after I returned from Vietnam. Bernie was killed on March 24th while trying to take out an NVA, North Vietnamese Army, 50 caliber machine gun positioned near the end of the runway at Khe Sanh. At their home, his father greeted me at the front door and introduced me to Bernie's young widow as she held her infant son, who Bernie never saw. Bernie's mother would not come out of the bedroom because she did not believe her son was dead. I lived in a nearby town, and I thought his family would like to know how he was killed, and his father was extremely grateful for my visit. I explained the mission and that Bernie was shot and killed in an ambush, and we were able to recover his body, but not several other Marines in my squad that day who were killed. But I couldn't fully describe to his family the actual conditions that took place that day. I could tell them that Bernie was carried from the battlefield over the shoulder of a fellow Marine, Medeiros. I could not tell them, and this is where I don't know how much detail I should go in this audience. You tell me. I mean, I don't know.
Keep going.
Keep going?
Keep going.
Okay.
Let me see where I was. I explained the mission to Bernie. I explained the mission that Bernie was shot and killed in an ambush, and we were able to recover his body. And several other Marines we couldn't recover that day. But I couldn't fully describe to his family the actual conditions that took place. I could tell them that Bernie was carried from the battlefield over the shoulder of a fellow Marine, Medeiros. I could not tell them Bernie was headshot. I could not tell them that Medeiros had their son's blood completely soak his flak jacket, and that their son's blood ran down in streams down Medeiros' legs and into his boots. I could not tell them that pieces of his brain and skull tissue would fall from his head as it bounced off Medeiros' flak jacket with every stride. But I know this story inside. Medeiros himself was killed in action 3 weeks later on Hill 689 on April 16th. Our squad leader, and John Nzena, was killed and his body was never recovered. During the ambush, Nzena was wounded, and our corpsman was applying a large field dressing to his back when the second fatal shot went between his fingers and that held the bandage, killing Nzena. Crawling back under intense AK fire, the corpsman lived that day. In another battle in 689, 43 Marines in my battalion were killed in action. The close combat was so intense that when we withdrew that night, we had thought we had all the wounded accounted for, but we'd left some behind, presuming they were dead. The wounded left behind as the hours passed, cried out mournfully to God to rescue them and for their loved ones, yes, even their mothers, until they were executed and dismembered by the North Vietnamese Army. I hear them still. After 44 years of silence, I wrote this some years ago. After 44 years of silence, I have written several stories about the combat experiences of my platoon in Vietnam for the author William Myers, Some of these combat stories and others have been released in his second book called Vietnam Medals and Marines. That's this book right here. I tell you these deeply personal stories because honoring the courage and bravery of my brothers continues to compel my strongest emotions. But my story is still just a tiny drop in the ocean of sacrifices made by millions of Americans from our Revolutionary War to the Embassy Marine Guards in the Middle East that were killed this morning. When I wrote this, there were 2 Marines killed in Iraq. From Bunker Hill to the unnamed hill in Afghanistan, as you sleep tonight, Americans quietly serve in our military and risk their lives for us every day. I do not expect you to understand war.